Hi everyone, I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Dana Covarrubias, costume designer from Only Murders in the Building. And this season of the show really is steeped in the world of Broadway as Oliver Mount's Death Rattle Dazzle. And I saw an amazing post on your Instagram about using Broadway musicals as kind of inspiration for Selena Gomez's costumes. What what sparked that idea, and how do you go about incorporating a musical into streetwear?
Right. Well, every season we've had some sort of theme or um, inspiration for Mabel's costumes. And this season, because the whole season was sort of about Broadway and about Oliver mounting this production, we thought it would be appropriate to use, Broadway musicals and movie musicals as our inspiration for her costumes. And mostly it's, very lightly inspired. It's not like I'm putting like, a full head to toe sequined. I mean, I did actually put a full head to toe sequin look on her, but for most of her normal sort of casual streetwear looks, it's just a nod to, either the color of a costume or something, or the silhouette or something like that. So, for instance, we, had uh Grease, was one of my
Mhm.
favorite movie musicals growing up. So I definitely wanted to do a little nod there. So in one episode, we had Selena wearing this light pink sort of faux leather top that kind of reminded me of something the Pink Ladies would have worn. And then in another episode, we had her wearing this coverall. It was like an episode where she happened to be moving apartments, so we thought it was appropriate for her to be wearing coveralls because she's moving. And it sort of felt very like Grease Lightning vibes. So yeah, we kind of, use things in that way. It's like a little more of just like a nod to the thing. Um, but yeah, it was fun for research for the season. I, rewatched a ton of musicals and it was a blast. It was just so much fun to kind of mine all of those for ideas and I, grew up loving musicals and I was a theater kid, so I was in musicals growing up and yeah, it was super fun.
Is there a specific like favorite coat or something that
Mm.
maybe people don't realize is from a musical, but you're really proud that it's in there?
Let me think. Let me think. Um, we did so many fun things. I really loved, it wasn't a coat, it was a dress, but I really loved the idea. Well, there's so many. I really loved, there's two, I'll say two. There was, the look that she wore. It wasn't quite a date, but it was, she went out to like a jazz club with her love interest of that season. And so we wanted her to wear like sort of a date night dress. And we ended up finding this beautiful Farm Rio dress that was velvet and had sort of like a rose motif all over it. And that was perfect because we knew at some point in the season we wanted to do something that was a nod to Phantom of the Opera. And so that kind of felt appropriate for that because it was, sort of like darkly romantic and had roses on it, which is a, theme in the Phantom of the Opera. So that one I loved. And then the other one, oh, she, in which episode was this? I can't remember if it was one or two, but she went to the Ben Glenroy funeral and she was wearing like a pinstripe um long wool coat overcoat, and then she's wearing a suit underneath that also was pinstriped with like kind of a white pointed collar under that, and that was all sort of a nod to Chicago and like kind of the men's suiting in Chicago. So yeah, I mean also every
Yeah.
outfit had like a little nod to something in there, but yeah, those are my favorites.
I love it as a concept because it's kind of like this subliminal messaging almost that
Yeah.
it's like a hidden little Easter egg or gem in there.
Yeah.
Do you find that you kind of use that sort of approach with your costuming, or is that specific to this show?
It's become I have used it, I would say for years, but it's become more and more prevalent with this show because it's a mystery show and because we're like, I think season one when I did press interviews, there were a lot of questions and just fans and stuff also were wondering like what element of the costume is involved in the mystery and they want to know, is there something else going on like with the costumes that will help me figure out the, who the killer is this season, or, those kinds of things. And I was like,
Mm,
I don't want to like, and a lot of times when we start shooting, I don't know who the killer is. We don't know until much later in the season usually. But I wanted to do something that was something the fans could engage in, and interact with, where they're trying to kind of figure out what the mystery is behind the costume. And so it's always been this thing of like, what inspired this costume. I think it's fun for the fans to think like, what musical could this be? Or,
mm. Yeah, the whole show, from every department, just has, it feels very New York, obviously, but it feels there's like a coziness to it. How do you kind of get on that same aesthetic
Mhm.
across all departments? What's that collaboration like?
Well, we just work very closely together. We are in constant communication about, I'm constantly talking to Patrick, our production designer, and looking at photos of the sets he's planning, and talking to the set deck department and seeing what they're planning on doing. And even I even have a close relationship with our composer Sid, and it's like the music really inspires me. It's, I think, some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard for television. And our sets are absolutely stunning. Of course, they're award winning and unbelievable. And just walking through them, I'm still like every day amazed when I look at them. They're gorgeous. Um, so yeah, I think it's, we're just constantly making sure we're all on the same page with palette and texture and tone. Um, and yeah, I think that's how we achieve that. And I think it's, it's just such a well established at this point world that we've created. And so you can very easily, like, as we're shopping, I can very easily be like, oh, this feels very Arconian, or this feels very Only Murders. And, then you see something else that's like a different color or a different style or silhouette, and you're just like, no, that's not our world. We've had this very specific world we've created.
Yeah. You do get to, I think, step outside of the parameters a little bit this season. Like in the there's a really fun kind of fever dream that kind of
Mm.
pays homage to All That Jazz, the famous Anne Ranking number. When you have a moment like that where it's clearly referencing something, how do you toe the line of both paying homage as well as making it fit within that framework of the show?
Right. Well, that was an interesting one because yeah, we, obviously it's a nod to All That Jazz, but we were I think like legally also you're trying not to do the exact same costume or the exact
Sure.
same thing, because you don't, you want to do, and also, you're fitting your actors. It's like we had to make costumes that were good for Selena and Steve, like, and it just had to fit their bodies and be the right silhouette for them. So, that also informed what the costumes needed to be. But yeah, um I think with the hat, that very specific Fosse hat and the gloves, it's like that alone. Like that's all you need for Fosse. Like you just need the hat
Sure.
and gloves, and then you kind of, and the attitude. It's all the attitude. It's like they could kind of be wearing whatever, and like as long as they had that Fosse attitude, it's gonna read Fosse. But no, that was very fun making those sort of, we had several fever dreams throughout the season happen, and it's always very exciting to design the costumes for those scenes, because we do get to step outside of our world and create this fantasy world. And I think for the fans too, and myself being a fan watching the show, it's exciting to see our characters in these other worlds, because so often most of our show is, as it's called, Only Murders in the Building. They're in the building. They're in the building all the time. So it's nice to see them step out into these other worlds where, you get to see Selena performing, and like she's in, because we all know that she's a performer, um, as Selena Gomez. But as Mabel, you don't really get to see her do that. So that was really fun.
Yeah. And of course, there's also a whole Broadway musical this season, which obviously requires plenty of costuming. And with the title Death Rattle Dazzle, it seems like it should be kind of ridiculous, but it also has to turn out really good. So
Right.
what was the jumping off point, in terms of establishing an aesthetic for that?
Well, so there was a straight play version of Death Rattle Dazzle, which was just called Death Rattle. And so that was the jumping off point. We started from there. And so that's the play you saw, seconds of in the end of the previous season. And then, it gets reimagined as this musical. So we knew that the straight play, we had in our script, it said, it's set in the 1940s, it's in Nova Scotia. So we knew those things. We were like, 1940s, Nova Scotia. And then we knew that it was a murder mystery about a mother dying, and that who did it? Was it the babies? Was it someone in the town? So that those were kind of our parameters. And then we sort of went from there. And I think Loretta refers to it at one point, but everyone, I think she talks about Little Shop of Horrors, that musical, as being an inspiration for this sort of tone of Death Rattle Dazzle. So we use that also as a guiding principle for our show. Like, how silly can we go? How realistic? I think Little Shop of Horrors is like really great at, like, it feels pretty realistic and costuming wise, like in some of the scenes. And then there's the sort of like the backup dancers in their sparkly costumes at one point in Little Shop of Horrors. And so and then obviously a, man-eating plant. So you're taken out of reality in those scenes. So that's kind of what we were like, okay, that's a good tone. That's a good medium place to live, for the tone of the costumes in Death Rattle Dazzle. And there are definitely points where we pushed it a little far and we had to be reeled back, as happens. You get excited and you're like, sequins and, crabmen, and, you get really, we went really, far with it. And then there were a couple times where we had to be like, okay, it still needs to be, there still needs to be an emotional connection. And, when Loretta sings her lullaby, you want the audience to feel, emotionally connected to that. So you can't make it too silly or else you'll lose that, I think. But yeah, it was so fun creating the Broadway costumes. It was a blast.
And Little Shop of Horrors also has Steve in it, in the movie
Right,
version,
right,
but this
exactly.
time he's the one who gets the sparkles,
Right,
with his,
exactly.
I think that was my favorite, was the sparkly blue
Oh,
police
so
uniform.
fun. Yeah,
Was he
it was
excited
so
to wear
great.
that?
Once we saw, yeah, he loved it. And once we saw him in it on the stage with the lights, when the lights hit the sequins, it's just so beautiful. And it was just so fun. I mean, I could have watched him on stage all day in that. It was so great. Um, but yeah, I think that was maybe my favorite costume. I mean, I love the crabmen too, because they were just so silly. But yeah, the Steve Constable sequin costume was hilarious.
Do you ever have like actors coming to you like, oh, I really feel like my character needs a scarf in this moment because XYZ? And is that a thing? And how do you incorporate that into, an idea that you already have?
Yeah, I mean, constantly. It happens all the time. I mean, it's such a, it's really, I think that, when people ask me sometimes, what's something that, a lay person, like a non-TV, person might not know about costuming for television and just costuming in general. It's incredibly collaborative. It's not just my brain coming up with these things. It's myself, it's the actors, it's the producers, it's the directors, it's the writers, it's my, assistant designers, it's my shoppers. It's such a huge group of people involved to create a costume. And it's very often a lot of the conversations with the actors and the fittings are, oh, I just, like this shoe isn't quite right, or I really think that there needs to be, this sort of one thing is missing. And that's where the collaboration happens. And it's always very welcome, and it's always very, like, I don't know. I think the more people, and not, I mean, you don't want everyone involved, but you want, it's nice to have a lot of people involved in these processes, because I just think it makes the costume feel more real, because as people, when we dress ourselves, of course, we're influenced by a million different things. We're influenced by fashion we see, we're influenced by our friends, best friend style, we're influenced by our parents, we're influenced by film and television, so there's all these different, like, elements that create the look you wear. So I love when actors have input like that and want to be involved in, you know, um, deciding what their characters' looks are.
Yeah. And a lot of your work has been in contemporary costume design, and it's not often, like, sometimes when we think of costumes, everyone gravitates toward period flowy dresses, and that's what people think of. But that's not what contemporary is, and this is a realm where you've now become a two-time Emmy nominee for this type of work. What is the biggest kind of misconception about contemporary design, and what's the biggest challenge?
Mm. Um, I would say, you know, that I think that as contemporary costume designers, we're really like we really are storytellers. We're writers in a way, you know, and I think that's something that people might not think about. I think a misconception is, I think, you know, even within the film world sometimes is that, oh, it's just clothes. Like everyone wears clothes and it's easy or it's, you know, it's like, you know, you could just run out and grab whatever from any store. But what we do is we're not just shoppers, you know, we're really storytellers. We're really thinking about a character's psychology and you know why they're wearing what they're wearing on that day and the thought process that goes into it and the work that goes into it and the amount of people that go into every single costume. The volume is really crazy, especially for contemporary television. You know, you think about, you know, we have our three leads and then you know, maybe, you know, 1 to 8 co-stars that are all hugely famous on their, you know, in their own way. And then we have a million other actors and tons of background players and just the amount of work that goes into it. And that's just, you know, if you're thinking about one episode, maybe it's 3 days, script days in that one episode. So that's 3 changes times 80 actors, you know, plus background. And then you're doing that 10 episodes. So it's just the volume, I think, is just so, you know, crazy and impressive that everyone pulls it off. And the amount of time we pull it off, the amount of money we pull it off, having. And yeah, I think the idea that like, you know, we're really helping to tell the story of the world and of the script and that it's not just that clothes really mean something and they're, you know, whether it's subliminal, like you were saying before, like to the audience, or a little bit more obvious, it's such an important part of the film storytelling process. And I think it's just as complex and maybe even harder sometimes to communicate who someone is through a contemporary, you know, clothing than period clothing. Um, you know, and it's all with contemporary, you're creating it all. You know, with period, you're sort of recreating something, which is very difficult and its own whole thing. But with contemporary, you know, it's really from scratch, which is, I think, interesting as well.
Yes, well, really excellent work this season, bringing these folks into the world of Broadway. So, Dana, thank you so much for joining me and discussing Only Murders in the Building.
Yeah, thank you, Sam.